That's not how wills work, sweetheart. Your grandmother was confused at the end. She didn't mean any of it literally. My stepfather said it the way he said most things, with the calm, rehearsed patience of someone who had already decided the conversation was over before it began. He was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, still wearing his coat, coffee mug in hand, like he'd just stopped by to check on the house. Like it wasn't already his, in his mind. The funeral had been 4 days earlier. We'd barely gotten the flower arrangements out of the church before he started making calls. My name is Faye. I'm 31 years old. I work as a radiology technician at a mid-sized hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I drive a 2017 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper I keep meaning to fix, and until 8 months ago, I rented a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the house where my grandmother raised me. I want to be specific about that. She raised me, not in the vague, grandparents helped out sense. My mother left when I was 4. My father was never a consistent presence. My grandmother, Rosemary, everyone called her Gram, took me in, enrolled me in school, showed up to every single recital, graduation, and difficult Tuesday in between. For 27 years, she was the most stable thing in my life. When she died, she left behind a small craftsman house in Hilliard, a savings account, and a will that her attorney had drawn up 3 years prior, when she was sharp as ever and had just finished a 500-piece puzzle of the Swiss Alps. The will was clear. The house went to me. A separate account, roughly $47,000, went to my uncle on her side. A few personal items were distributed to other family members. My stepfather got nothing. Neither did my mother, who had drifted back into my life 6 years ago after getting sober, remarried this man named Douglas, and slowly positioned herself as the family's administrative center. She managed Graham's medical appointments in the last 2 years of her life. She had the login to Graham's email. She knew where the documents were kept. That part matters. The week after the funeral, Douglas stood in that kitchen and told me the will didn't reflect Graham's true wishes. He said she had told them, verbally, that she wanted the house sold and the proceeds split among all immediate family. He said she had been, in his words, not herself when the original will was drafted, and that a more recent document existed that superseded it. He slid a paper across the kitchen table. I looked at it. It had Graham's name at the top. It referenced her address, her attorney's name. It outlined a new distribution, house to be sold, proceeds divided 5 ways, which somehow included Douglas and my mother and her 2 kids from a previous marriage that Graham had met exactly twice. At the bottom was what looked like Graham's signature. I picked it up and read it twice. Then I set it down. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "She gave it to us last spring," my mother said. She was standing near the sink, not quite looking at me. She wanted to update things. She said she felt bad that the house was only going to one person when there were so many people who loved her. I didn't say anything for a moment. I thought about Graham last spring. I had visited her in April. We'd sat on the back porch and she'd told me about the cardinals coming back to the feeder. She'd asked me whether I was eating enough. She had seemed tired. Yes, her health had been declining, but she had also told me clearly on that same afternoon that she wanted me to have the house because it was where I grew up and she didn't want it to go to strangers. She said it the same way she said things she meant, quietly, with no drama, like a fact about the weather. "Okay," I said to Douglas. "Can I take a copy of this?" He hesitated for just a second, just one. Then he said sure, and handed me a photocopy. I drove home. I put the paper on my kitchen counter. I made myself eat dinner. Then I sat down and called Graham's attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had been practicing estate law in Columbus for over 30 years. I had her number because Graham had given it to me herself 2 years ago, folded into a birthday card with a note that said, "Just in case you ever need it, sweetheart." Patricia answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. I described the document Douglas had shown me. There was a pause on her end. "Faye," she said, "I have the original will in my files." Rosemary came in and reviewed it with me, 14 months before she passed. She made no changes. She did not contact my office about any amendments after that date. "Is there any chance she drafted something on her own?" I asked. "Outside your office?" "That's possible," Patricia said carefully. "A holographic will, handwritten and signed, can be valid in Ohio under certain circumstances. But what you're describing doesn't sound like a holographic will. It sounds like a typed document with a signature. Yes. Then someone created that document, and the signature would need to be verified. I told her I'd scan and send it over. She said she'd review it and get back to me. She also told me, gently but directly, to photograph everything in the house before anything was moved, and to avoid signing anything Douglas presented to me. I did exactly that. The next morning, I drove to the house before anyone else was there and spent 2 hours, photographing every room, every piece of furniture, every shelf and drawer. Graham had kept meticulous records. Her filing cabinet in the spare bedroom had folders going back 15 years. Utility bills, insurance documents, medical records, bank statements. I photographed all of it. I also found something I wasn't looking for. In the back of the filing cabinet, behind a folder labeled Miscellaneous 2021, there was a printed email chain. The dates were from 14 months before Graham passed. The thread was between Graham and Patricia Holt, confirming their appointment to review the will. At the bottom of the last email, Graham had written a single line, by hand, in the margin, in her loopy cursive. Everything goes to Faye. That's final. R. I stood there in the quiet of that spare bedroom for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the blinds in long strips across the carpet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen down the hall. I took a breath. Then I photographed that, too. Patricia called me back 2 days later. She had reviewed the document Douglas had produced. She said the formatting was inconsistent with documents produced by her office. Wrong font, different margin spacing, and critically, the signature didn't match the exemplars she had on file from Graham's legitimate documents. I want to be clear, she said. I'm not making a legal determination right now, but I am telling you that this document has significant irregularities that would need to be examined by a forensic document examiner before it could be considered valid. She also told me something I hadn't known to ask about. The document Douglas had shown me was a Word file, apparently printed from a computer. Patricia had asked me to send her the actual file if I could obtain it, not just the printed copy, because digital documents contain metadata, creation date, modification date, the name of the author, the name of the device it was created on. I did not have the digital file, but I knew who did. My mother still had Graham's old laptop. She had taken it from the house the week of the funeral, saying she needed to back up Graham's photos. I had thought nothing of it at the time. I texted her and asked if I could borrow the laptop to look through some of Graham's old pictures. She said of course. She dropped it off 2 days later, and I could tell by the way she handed it to me, a little too casually, a little too willing, that she thought the laptop was already clean. It wasn't. I took it to a friend of mine, a guy named Kevin, who does IT support and knows his way around a file system. I asked him to look for any recently created or modified Word documents. He found 3. 2 were grocery lists. The third was a file named Rosemary Will. Update final.doc.sex. The metadata told the rest. The document had been created 8 weeks after Graham's death. The author field listed Douglas's full name. The device was identified as his Dell laptop. It had been modified twice, once the day it was created and once 3 days before he slid it across the kitchen table and told me it reflected my grandmother's true wishes. Kevin printed the metadata report. I sat at his kitchen table and read it. Then I called Patricia. The next few weeks moved the way these things do when they stop being a family disagreement and become a legal matter. Slowly, then all at once, Patricia filed a formal challenge to the document on my behalf. A forensic document examiner confirmed that the signature on Douglas's version was inconsistent with Graham's authentic signatures. The metadata report was submitted as evidence. Douglas hired an attorney. My mother stopped returning my calls. There was a hearing. I sat in a wood-paneled room in the Franklin County Probate Court and watched Douglas's attorney try to argue that the metadata could have been corrupted, that the file might have been created on one device and authored by another person, that there were innocent explanations for all of it. The judge did not appear persuaded. The original will was upheld. The house was mine. The $47,000 went to my uncle as Graham had intended. Douglas and my mother were ordered to return a number of items they had removed from the house in the weeks after the funeral. Jewelry, a set of silver-plated candlesticks that had been in the family for 40 years, and a cedar chest that had Graham's initials carved into the lid. Some of those items came back, some of them didn't. The DA's office looked into the matter. I don't know exactly where that stands, it's been referred and these things take time. But Patricia told me that document forgery in connection with an estate is treated seriously in Ohio, and that the metadata report was, in her words, unusually clean evidence. Unusually clean. I keep thinking about that phrase. My grandmother was not a dramatic woman. She didn't like confrontation. She kept her house neat, her feelings measured, her love steady and consistent over decades. She pressed wild flowers between the pages of old books. She saved birthday cards from people who had been dead for 20 years. She wrote things down because she believed words on paper lasted longer than memory. She was right about that. I moved into the house in March. The cardinals came back to the feeder, same as they do every spring. I sat on the back porch the first warm Saturday of the season with a cup of coffee and looked at the yard she had tended for 31 years, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had almost been taken. Not just the house. The proof that she had loved me specifically, intentionally, by name. That she had sat across from an attorney and said, "This is who I trust. This is who stays." Someone tried to erase that. They typed a document on a Tuesday afternoon and printed it and carried it across a kitchen table and looked me in the eye and told me my grandmother had changed her mind. But she hadn't. She never had. And they made the mistake of leaving a timestamp. My mother called me once, about 2 months after the hearing. She didn't apologize. She said she hoped I understood that she had been under a lot of pressure, that Douglas had convinced her it was the right thing to do, that she had only wanted what was fair. I listened until she was finished. Then I said, "She left me the house because she knew I would take care of it. She was right." I hung up. I went back to the kitchen. I made dinner in the same pots Graham used for 30 years, on the same stove, under the same ceiling light she always meant to replace but never did. The old clock above the doorway still runs 4 minutes fast, and I haven't changed it. I don't intend to. Some things you keep exactly as they were left to you. There's a clock above the kitchen doorway that runs 4 minutes fast. Graham never fixed it. I think about that a lot. How she lived with a small, harmless inaccuracy every single day and simply accounted for it. She always knew what time it actually was. She just didn't feel the need to announce it. That's the thing about people who are genuinely good. They don't perform it. They just quietly know. I've been thinking about what it actually took to get through this. Not the legal part. Not the court dates or the forensic reports. But the internal part. The part where you sit across from your own mother and watch her nod along while someone tells you your grandmother changed her mind, and you have to decide, in that moment, who you're going to be. I almost signed something in those first 2 weeks. There was a document Douglas brought over, a release of some kind framed as simplifying the process. I was grieving. I was exhausted. And a part of me, the part that had spent 31 years trying to keep the peace in a family that was never quite mine, wanted to just let it go. I didn't, not because I was certain. I was terrified, honestly. But I'd learned something from Graham without ever being taught it directly. That doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same action. And the gap between them is where your actual character lives. She modeled that for me, quietly, consistently, for decades. She took in a 4-year-old nobody else stepped up for. She didn't make it a story. She just did it. And then she kept doing it, every ordinary day, without needing it acknowledged. I think about what Douglas was counting on. He was counting on grief making me slow. On my instinct to avoid conflict outweighing my instinct toward truth. On the assumption that I wouldn't know enough or push hard enough or find the right person to call in time. He underestimated what it means to have been raised by someone who taught you, through example, not lecture, that details matter, that paper trails matter, that you write things down because memory fades but documents don't. Graham kept every bill, every letter, every printed email going back 15 years. She wasn't paranoid. She was precise. And that precision, inherited without me even realizing it, is what saved the house. I've heard people say that the truth always comes out eventually. I used to find that comforting in a vague, passive way, like it was something that happened on its own, something the universe arranged. I don't think that anymore. The truth came out because I called an attorney on a Wednesday night, because I drove to the house early before anyone else arrived, because I photographed a filing cabinet, because I asked a friend to look at a laptop instead of taking someone's word for what was or wasn't on it. The truth came out because someone did the quiet, unglamorous work of going to find it. That's what I want to carry forward, not anger. That burned itself out somewhere around the third court filing, not bitterness toward my mother, which would only mean she takes up permanent residence in my head. What I want to carry is the understanding that integrity isn't a feeling, it's a practice. Patience isn't passive, it's a discipline. And paying attention, really paying attention, to documents and details, and the small things people say when they think you're not listening. That's not paranoia. That's how you protect what matters. The Cardinals came back to the feeder last week, first warm afternoon of the season. I sat on the back porch with my coffee and watched them, and I thought, she knew they would. She counted on continuity. She believed that the things she built and tended would still be standing after she was gone. She was right. She just needed one person to make sure of it.